Howdy, Dennis Bradford here. Let's think some about being, feeling, and doing better. Are you serious about becoming happier for the rest of your life? If so, and your personal energy calibration is 599 or below, see the previous video, I encourage you to do so. In this video, you'll learn the 2 things required for success. Please realize that if you work on yourself and raise your calibration by even just 1 point, you'll be benefiting everyone else too. That's the real, quote, importance of letting go of or surrendering negative belief systems and emotions, end quote. From David R. Hawkins, M.D., Ph.D., Truth versus Falsehood. Using some spiritual practice or other to work on yourself means reducing the influence of all dualistic belief systems and emotions, which are the obstacles to enlightenment, waking up spiritually. That's the result of dissolving the obstacles that otherwise prevent us from realizing our true nature. Truth and reality are identical and eternally present, merely awaiting discovery. There is only one identical question underlying all human problems, and that is the resolution of what truth is and by what means it is knowable. The ramparts of ignorance are guarded by egocentricity. The ego sees truth as its ultimate enemy, end quote. So, as the Buddha and many other sages have also taught, that's the sense in which ignorance is the real enemy. We remain ignorant until we have killed the egoic self, which means dissolving all attachments to it and its products such as our conceptual hierarchies. I agree with Dr. Hawkins when he claims that, quote, the great issue that confronts mankind as a whole is the healing of this spiritual blindness, end quote. Everything else is of secondary, even peripheral importance. That's why energy testing is such a great blessing. If it works, and I've tested it myself and have not been able to find anything wrong with it, it solves the fundamental problem we have that prevents us from living better, namely, the inability of our minds to distinguish truth from falsehood. For example, I've tested sages I've personally known, for example, Roshi Philip Kapleau, or no, for example, Bodhin Kolhid Roshi, as well as sages who I know only indirectly, for example, Eckhart Tolle, and all calibrate over 600. For example, historical figures, for example, Hitler and Stalin, and contemporary people who are well known, such as internationally recognized politicians, calibrate about where I thought they would, as do family members, friends, and acquaintances. Some calibrations, I confess, have been somewhat surprising. Occasionally, there have been results that appeared inconsistent, but none that I couldn't determine why, and the inconsistency was my fault. It satisfies me that it solves our basic problem. Quote, doubt is the ego. When confronted by absolute truth, the ego collapses and literally dies, end quote. From Dr. Hawkins's I, his emphasis. It's helpful to think of doubt as a product of thought and to realize that because absolute truth, the self, is unity and all thought is dualistic, doubt is irrelevant. The self is beyond all dualities. The self is ever-present, unconditional, and not subject to thought, end quote. So, as long as we stay attached to thought, we don't get it. To get it, drop all attachments. Quote, with surrender, obstructions are dissolved. Enlightenment is merely the emergence of truth, when the obstructions to the realization of that truth have been removed, end quote. What's critical to surrendering is one's personal energy test calibration. Consciousness level is correlated with perception and intellectual positionality, and therefore determines one's worldview and experience of it. This in turn correlates with options. It is also intrinsic to one's psychological makeup and emotionality, as well as physical and psychic health, and one's philosophical attitudes, end quote. We all like our conceptual hierarchies. We're fond of them. Quote, everyone secretly believes that their view of the world is correct, and any other is wrong, end quote. From Truth versus Falsehood. We all like to think of ourselves as open-minded. Balderdash. Quote, although the human mind likes to believe that it is, of course, dedicated to truth, in reality, what it really seeks is confirmation of what it already believes, end quote. Genuine philosophers, people who are really open-minded and courageous enough to challenge their own beliefs seriously, are fewer than 1 in 3 of us. Quote, truth calls a spade a spade. The sword of truth is the pathway to peace and freedom. For the seeker of truth, the surrendering of attachments to positionalities is a necessary requirement and therefore a primary challenge, end quote. From Power versus Force. The good news about surrendering is that it's neither necessarily difficult nor lonely. Quote, one can let go of the egoistic illusion that spiritual progress is difficult and that one has to do it all alone, end quote. From Truth versus Falsehood. If you've watched all these videos, you don't really need any more instruction. You require only 2 things. First, you need daily to work on yourself using an effective spiritual practice. In other words, what matters is, quote, the disciplined practice of actually applying it with regularity in daily life, end quote. Second, you need humility. You need to drop the delusion that you already know everything. Quote, the most important quality necessary for true growth and evolution is the practice and principle of humility. Humility is an attitude and a position of inquiry, end quote. With humility and proper practice, your days of emotional suffering are over. So, practice daily with humility. Gratitude and humor also help a lot. Let's end emotional distress.